We're going to be in the Gospel of Mark. We've been going verse by verse through the Gospel of Mark, looking at the life and teachings of Jesus. So not just what he taught, but how he lived his life and how that impacts us today in the world. So if you have a Bible, turn to the Gospel of Mark, and we're going to be in chapter 6. The week before Easter, we had started chapter 6, and we looked at a few different parts of it, but we're going to focus in the middle section of Mark 6 and finish up our teaching of Mark 6 today. So Mark chapter 6, and we're going to start in verse number 32. The Gospel of Mark chapter 6, verse 32. And they departed into a desert place by ship privately. I'll pause there for a second to remind what's going on here. The 12 disciples, which are now being kind of known and appointed as the apostles, and something unique about these 12 men is that God gave them, Jesus gave them special authority to go out and to heal and to do these wonders and to point people to Jesus. And so they come back to Jesus like, man, you won't believe this. Like, people are getting healed and all these amazing things are happening. And like Jesus would be surprised. Like, I just told you to do it. And you're going to, they're like, yeah, but it actually happened. Like, it was amazing. And he's like, okay, this is awesome. He's like, but something was noticeable, which is they didn't have time to eat. They were so busy. Like, it was so crazy. And Jesus let them know, hey, you need to take time to rest. You need to take time to eat. You need to recoup here. And so let's get away to rest. And so that's what they're attempting to do here. They don't actually get to that rest that they had planned, but that was what the intention was. And they departed into a desert place by ship privately. Verse 33, and the people saw them departing. Okay, have you ever tried getting away from a group of people, or it's a really busy thing going on, you try to get away for it for a moment, and they saw you. They saw where you were going, and they head you off. Like, they don't understand, I want to be alone for a moment. Like that, they're following me around, and they head you off. So that's what's happening here. They leave by ship, and the people saw them departing, and many knew him, and ran afoot thither out of all cities, and outwent them, and came together unto him. So they saw where they were going, like, oh, we can beat them there, like running around, and we're going to beat them to where they're going, and had this plan. So word of mouth, once again, this has happened time and time again already in these first 5 chapters of Mark, is that by word of mouth, people are hearing about Jesus and are excited about what's going on, and like, man, he does these miracles, and he's this teacher, and you got to go see him. And so they're trying to go rest, and they get cut off by this large crowd. Verse 34, and Jesus, when he came out, saw much people and was very irritated. No, it doesn't say that. It says, and was moved with compassion toward them, because they were as sheep not having a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. So keep in mind, it was Jesus' idea for them to get rest. It was Jesus' idea. In fact, in a moment, Jesus is still going to go get rest. But it gets interrupted. But he views this crowd, and he views them with compassion. And he begins to teach them the things that he's been teaching to other people. Because when he saw them, he saw, and this analogy that Mark is using of sheep with no shepherd, like, sheep herding would have been very normal in that culture. And he's like, it'd be like you expecting sheep knowing where to go and what to do and find grass to eat and water to find without a shepherd. I'm like, well, that wouldn't work. That doesn't work. It's like, exactly. And when Jesus saw the crowd, it's like, I see a bunch of wandering sheep, and they need someone to guide them. They need someone to lead them. But this phrase, it's actually one word in the Hebrew, is was moved with compassion. And this is a really powerful word. When you think about something being compassionate, whatever, it's deeper than just saying, oh, I'm compassionate towards that person, or I care about that person. This phrase, to be moved with compassion, is speaking of a kind of love and compassion that comes from the innermost core of who Jesus is. Why is that significant? Well, that means that it's a genuine, authentic, pure love that is not put on or a passing thought. It's not like, sometimes that's how it is for us. It's like, I have a lot going on, but I know I should be compassionate towards this person, so I will be. That's not what Jesus is doing here. Jesus isn't like, oh, I was going to rest. Guess I should teach him something. Like, that's not what's going on here. It's sincerely authentic. It's coming from the core of who he is. And it's not just a passing thought either. It's like, oh man, it'd be nice if someone could help them. And then you forget about it. Like, oh wait, was I going to help that person to do that thing? Like, he's all in on this. It's something that stems from the very identity of Jesus. Jesus is the perfect embodiment of God. So of course he's loving. Of course he's full of compassion because God is love. It's who he is. And so of course that's going to come from who he is. Pastor R. Kent Hughes wrote this concerning the compassion of Jesus. And this is an awesome quote. All right, so let's take a screenshot of this right here. Regardless of whether you are a believer or not, if you cannot imagine that Jesus has tender compassion for you, you simply do not know what he is like. Jesus felt it. And may we reverently understand that though he is glorified, he still does. 9 times in the New Testament, we read of Jesus having this deep compassion. Sometimes it was when he saw someone ill. At other times, because of the other effects of sin. Jesus has merciful compassion toward you and toward the needy world, just as he did toward the 5,000. Jesus' deep felt compassion propelled him among the people, and he labored long and intensely among them. My favorite part of this quote was the very first part, is regardless of whether you are a believer or not, if you cannot imagine that Jesus has tender compassion for you, you simply do not know what he is like. Here's why this is significant. Jesus knew that there was people in the crowd, people he was moved with compassion toward, that would not worship him. He knew that. Jesus knew that there were people in the crowd, people that he was moved with compassion toward, that would deny him at some point. Jesus knew that there were people in the crowd, people that he was moved with compassion toward, that were just seeking a miracle but not seeking him. Yeah, give me a miracle. Don't really care about you or your teachings, but yeah, help me out. And we know this because that's what happens like next. Like these guys come to him later after the feeding of the 5,000 like, hey, can you make some more food? That'd be pretty cool. And had no interest in him at all. But even though he knows these things, he was still moved with compassion toward them because that's who he is. We've been spending literally weeks and months now studying in our Wednesday small group about how Jesus is gentle and lowly in heart, and that's who he is, and he reaches out in compassion and love. So may we rejoice that when Jesus sees us wandering like the sheep without a shepherd, and whether you're a believer or not, when he sees you wandering around, he has compassion towards you and wants to teach you and wants to guide you. And may we be transformed into having the same type of compassion as Jesus. Not a put on, not a passing thought, but may God transform our hearts to where our compassion, our love for people, just stems from who we are in Jesus. Of course we're going to be compassionate. Of course we're going to be filled with love for the people around us because Jesus has transformed us. And if Jesus loves us and he is in us, then we should love like Jesus. But that is a miracle. And God's still working on us. Sometimes we can have these moments like, man, like God's really changed my heart. I have love for people I've never had love for. I've been able to forgive people I didn't think I could forgive. And other times it's really hard because it's not you. It's God at work inside of you. Verse 35. And when the day was now far spent, you can imagine teaching a crowd that large, a lot of people. He also was, if you look at the other Gospels, he wasn't just teaching, he was also healing. Okay, and this is a large reveal, so he's healing some people, he's teaching the crowds, the day's far spent. Keep in mind, the disciples just did a whole bunch of work. So now they're really tired, like it's even more exhausting, another long day. And his disciples came unto him and said, this is a desert place, and now the time is far past. Send them away that they may go into the country round about and into the villages and buy themselves bread, for they have nothing to eat. Now, In a moment, they're going to see Jesus multiply food. But keep in mind, they'd never seen him do this before. So that's why they're not even suggesting it. In fact, he actually does it again later, and they have a different excuse that time. But either time, they don't say it, but they've never seen him do that before. Like, well, we should send them so they can get food. It seems logical, right? You've been in situations where it's like, well, we need to, yeah, someone else can take care of that. That's their problem. That's their thing. It has nothing to do with me. And then Jesus says the wildest thing. He looks at him, he answers and says to them, verse 37, give ye them to eat. He says, you feed them. Okay. I mean, can you imagine? It's just you and 11 other people, and your master, your rabbi. You tell them, hey, these people got to go eat. They're going to get hungry. We need to send them home. You go, oh, you feed them. First of all, we don't have that much food with us. And second of all, do you think we're rich? Do you think we can just go buy food for this large group of people? That's exactly what they say. They say, and they said to him, shall we go and buy 200 pennyworth of bread and give them to eat? Just so you know, that's 8 months' wages. And these guys do not have, they're all poor, okay? Like, have 8 months' wages. And so what they're saying to him is, this is humanly impossible. The only way we know how to do this is to go buy bread. And we don't have money for that. And so he calls them to do something that they literally don't have the ability to do. Jesus knows they don't have the ability to do it. He knows they don't. He knows they don't have 8 months' wages. He knows they don't have enough food there. But he just outright tells them, you go feed them. You do it. They're like, what? We can't do that. Verse 38. He saith unto them, how many loaves have ye? Go and see. And when they knew, they say 5 and 2 fishes. And he commanded them to make all sit down by companies upon the green grass. And they sat down in ranks by hundreds and by 50s. And when he had taken the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, he looked up to heaven and blessed and brake the loaves and gave them to his disciples to set before them. And the 2 fishes divided he among them all. Wait, hold on, what? So I'm guessing everyone just got a really tiny bite. I mean, microscopic. Okay. By the way, that's just humanly, like, I like someone to do the math of the type of bread they would have had and the type of 2 pickled fish that they would have had and try to feed over 5,000 people with it. I'm sorry. Sorry, I'm laughing, and you don't know why yet, but I'm laughing because people who are skeptics of the Bible saying what it means that it says will look at this and say, the miracle isn't that the food multiplied. It's that they were able to share just 5 loaves and 2 fish in such a big crowd. What? That doesn't even make any sense. That many people cannot share one little plate of food. It's not even possible. And what it goes on to say is this, to make it very clear. After he divides it among them all, verse 42, and they did all eat and were filled. They were fully satisfied with the meal. I don't know about you, but however small that portion would be to divide that up, would not be satisfied. That's not the miracle here. And we know this also because it says in verse 43, they took up 12 baskets full of the fragments and of the fishes. So they had 12 baskets left over of food. So this is a crazy miracle. They'd seen him heal people. Some of them got to see him raise up this girl from the dead. 3 of his disciples got to see him raise this girl from the dead. So they've seen some really amazing stuff. They've seen demons cast out. But now he does this crazy thing where he takes one meal and feeds a massive crowd of people till they're all full. And then there's leftovers. Now, this seems like a really big deal. One thing I want to point out about this is that Jesus asked them to feed them. We can't do that. We don't have 8 months' wages. And he goes, well, just see how much food we have. Okay, we got 5 loaves and 2 fish. Now what? And he goes, all right, let's pray over the meal. And okay. And they start passing it out and keep passing it out and keep passing it out and keep passing it out. Like, what is going on here? Because Jesus knew what he was going to do. He called them to something that they had no way of understanding how it would work, but Jesus knew. He was calling them to faith. He was calling them to trust. Like, I understand you might have doubts about this, but you're going to feed them. And then he enables them to do it. See, Jesus gave his disciples an impossible task from a human perspective. But then Jesus provided a way for them to do as he asked. Jesus often calls us to do things that are difficult and sometimes to do things that are humanly impossible. But then he provides and he enables us to do what he's called us to do. Verse 45. And straightway, so right away, all right, so he's done all the long day of healing and teaching and then another miracle of feeding this large crowd. And straightway, he constrained his disciples. That means he commanded them. He demanded of them. He didn't say, hey, why don't you do this? He goes, all right, get in the boat. You're leaving. All right, so he sends them into the boat to get into the ship and to go to the other side before unto Bethsaida while he sent away the people. Now, this is another one of those, like, one phrase things that you kind of dismiss. The crowd's 5,000 plus people. He sends his 12 disciples away, and then he by himself sends the crowd away. Have you guys seen any crowd control situations and all, how that's going to work out? It reminds me of also when Jesus will later throw everybody out of the temple because of them doing their terrible things there, and he kicks them all out. And that'd be like trying to go to farmer's market in Davenport. Does nobody know what that is? Farmer's market? Okay, some of you. Like a big farmer's market, and being able to single-handedly get them all to leave. If you just read it, you don't think much about it, but it's miraculous. But if Jesus wants a crowd of 5,000 people to leave, they're going to leave because he's God. So when he wants them to do it, they're gone. In the same way of casting them out, it's like, man, how did he do that? He's God. He could do that. Why didn't anybody grab him or stop him? Like, he's God. And so there's like kind of a miracle tucked in right there. He by himself sends the people away. And then verse 46, why did he send the disciples away? He sent them away, and then he departed into a mountain to pray. Jesus needed to be alone with the Father. It had been a lot of busy things going on, and he needed to get alone with the Father. Now, I'm not going to spend much time talking about this because we've talked about it before, but it's important that we don't just skip over this, is that there's an importance for all of us of getting away into what we call silence and solitude. That's what Jesus was doing. He's like, all right, you guys need to leave. And sends the crowds away that he's ministering to. You need to leave, and then I'm going to go up to the mountain to pray. So he sends the people away to get by himself, and he goes up into a quiet place. If Jesus needed to be alone and in the quiet with the Father, you and I definitely need to be alone and in the quiet with our Heavenly Father. It's essential. It's desperately important. And we talk about this often and we remind about it often because we live in such fingertip technology world. It's so easy to be distracted because one text message and your whole day just got thrown off. And you always have like 500 text messages. So all right, so one message or one Facebook post or one notification, and all of a sudden you're just completely whatever. And one news notification, whatever, when technology-wise, right? So like we get bombarded not only with just interruptions, but with the information that we then take in. So it's even more important in light of a very distracted world for us to be taking the time to be alone in the quiet. So that means you put the phone away. You get away from everybody. You make a plan. And like in our case, we have 5 kids, so you have to make sure that someone can watch the kids when you get off into silence and solitude, so you're not wondering what the kids are doing. All right, so these things are important to be able to get alone. So you have to plan it. You have to prepare for those type of things to get away. And that's what Jesus did that night. Verse 47. And when even was come, so when the evening came, the ship was in the midst of the sea, and he alone on the land. So the disciples are on the ship, he's on the land, verse 48. and he saw them toiling and rowing, for the wind was contrary unto them. Now, something to understand here, they've been in a storm before on a ship, probably the same ship. Philip taught that week when we did that. And what was crazy about that is he was on the boat with them, right? He was sleeping on the boat. And they're like, are you not scared that we might die? Are you not afraid that something might happen to us? Wake up. And he's like, what are you guys afraid for? And he calms the storm. This isn't a storm like that was. This is a wind. This is a strong headwind. And if you know anything about like the Sea of Galilee, is that windstorms were kind of a common thing. A nice and a really nice day out on the sea fishing or traveling, and out of nowhere, because of the way that the mountain, the terrain is structured, you can have this wind come down off the mountain and woof, and like, oh, okay. And so they're just trying to get to the next location, and so they're rowing and into the headwind, and they can't get anywhere. So I don't know how long they were rowing, but all I know is they've had a really, really, really long period of time of working and ministering and serving Jesus. Like, all right, now I need to cross here. And now they're stuck in this headwind. I was like, we're not getting anywhere. And so Jesus is on the land. He notices what's going on. Like, oh man, those guys aren't getting anywhere fast. All right. So it's not as a desperate situation as the other situation where they're probably taking water and stuff. This is just a frustrating thing of like, if we don't row, we're going to be all the way back where we started. And so they're just exhausted trying to row against, contrary to this wind. If you will, a windstorm of sorts. The wind was contrary unto them, and about the fourth watch of the night, he cometh, talking about Jesus, he cometh unto them walking upon the sea, and would have passed by them. Once again, Mark just nonchalantly says these things, like, oh yeah, he was walking on the water. In fact, the wind didn't even bother him. He could have passed them. Wait, what? So you have 12 men in a boat rowing, trying to get into the wind, and Jesus is just like, right into the wind like it's no big deal. Okay, this is wild. Like, this is wild. And keep in mind, I get it. We're looking at these miracles of healing and bringing people back to life and now multiplying food. But there's just something absolutely like imagery-wise of like a dude walking on the water against the wind faster than a boat. This is wild. So keep in mind, these guys are exhausted. They're so exhausted. They're physically exhausted. They're mentally drained. And he comes to them walking on the sea and would have passed by them. Verse 49. But when they saw him walking upon the sea, once again, these guys are exhausted and tired. They supposed it had been a spirit and cried out, ah, it's a ghost. There's a figure walking out on the water. What is that? I have to say, we'd all probably say something similar if you were like out fishing, or maybe you're on a cruise or whatever, and there's kind of this really strong wind, you're looking out, and all of a sudden you see someone just, like, oh, that's a ghost. There's some weird thing walking across the water that looks like a human. Like, this is a wild thing to see. And so some be like, oh man, they should have known it was Jesus. Like, nah, this is weird. This is officially a weird thing. Like, man, there's a ghost out there. And so they're crying out like, ah. For they all saw him, verse 50, and were troubled. And immediately he talked with them and saith unto them, be of good cheer, it is I. Be not afraid. I'm going to get a bit ahead of myself this morning, but I just want to just briefly point out, and we'll hit it again here in a moment, is that have you ever been in a position, something that God commanded you or called you to do? He told him to go. He told him to cross. And it feels like you're not getting anywhere. The wind's blowing in your face, you're just not getting anywhere. And you're like, where's God in all of this? He's present. Whatever the problem is, it's not a problem for him. He's just walking right into it. But sometimes we don't recognize him in it. Like, how could God be in this? How could God be present with me in this? How could this even be possible for God to be around in this? And yet he is, and he has to remind us and say, hey, it's me. I'm here. It's me. I'm present in this. I saw what was going on. It's not a problem. I see it's a problem for you. It's not a problem for me. It's me. And God has to remind us sometimes that he is present, that he is there, that he is able. They'd never seen Jesus walk on water before. So sometimes in the midst of a certain trial or struggle or storm, but there's no way God can show up in this. But maybe it's just because you've never seen him show up in that way or in that situation. All because you haven't seen it happen yet doesn't mean that it can't happen. Jesus is walking on water. So not only have they never seen multiplication of food before, they've never seen him walk on water before, they're just seeing these new things. The Gospel of Matthew, like we've been going through Mark, but the Gospel of Matthew tells us another part of this story, which is just really fascinating. So we have to pause and look at this part of the story. So Jesus shows up, hey, it's me. And then Matthew 14, verse 28 says, and Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water. I gotta love Peter, man. If you're not a ghost, then tell me to come out on the water with you. I don't know who thinks of things like this. I mean, I'm with the other 11, okay? I'm wondering if this is still some weird spirit out in the water. I'm definitely not Peter like, hey, can I walk out there too? That's not what I'm thinking at all. But that's what Peter does. Hey, can I come out? If it's you, can I come out too? You know? Keep in mind, the wind's still blowing too. Like this hasn't been calmed down yet. There's still this headwind. And like, so I'm definitely staying in the boat. But can I come out there too? Verse 29, he said, come. Like, okay, come on out. And he gets out. Like, that's enough for me. Yeah, let's do this. Kind of reminds me of you. Come, and when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. Okay, so first Jesus just walks up alongside this boat that's not going anywhere. Hey guys, Peter's like, if it's you, can I come out in the water? Come. He gets out and he starts walking on the water. The other 11 are going to be like, man, there must have been something weird in that loaves and fish we ate on the other side. Like, there's no way that we're seeing this right now. So now you have Jesus on the water and you got Peter walking on the water. The imagery of this, once again, is stunning and shocking. There's so much artwork that's been done of showing Jesus and Peter on the water and showing the storm and the 11 in the boat, like some awesome artwork. You can look that up online. Just some awesome pictures of that. Verse 30. But when he saw of Matthew 14, when he saw the wind boisterous, Peter was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. So he gets out there, takes a couple steps thinking this is awesome, and then is like, what am I doing? I can't walk on water. And what if the wind knocks me over? And like he starts thinking worst case scenarios, as we all do, and he starts sinking like a normal person would. And immediately, Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him, and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? It's like Jesus is asking Peter, did you think I was going to let you drown? Like, you asked if you could come out. I said you could come out. Why'd you doubt? In other words, why'd he doubt him? If he had called him to him, why did he allow the scariness of it to dictate his next steps? But even though he doubted, Jesus wasn't like, loser, and keep walking. He immediately helps him out. He does correct him, saying, why'd you doubt? I said you could come out here. But he also immediately helps him up. I can hear, to me, it'd be like Peter saying, yeah, It was scarier once I got off the boat. I thought it was a good idea when I was on there, but once I stepped out, it was kind of a little bit different. Not quite how I imagined it. When studying this passage, I read some commentary by Pastor Matthew Henry, classic right there. And he had a few golden nuggets of wisdom to share about the fear that Peter faced. And that if we're honest, we all face fear and doubt. Here's what Matthew Henry wrote, just a few different things he wrote. So I'm just going to read several things. That's not one paragraph, it's sentences from him. We fear because we forget the Lord, our Maker. Remember earlier I said we live in a distracted world? What drives us to fear instead of faith? It's because we forget. We forget. And sometimes it's understandable that we forget. In really traumatic situations and hard trials, it's understandable. But we're afraid because we forget the God that we serve. We forget our Maker. Peter, is another quote, had faith enough to bring him upon the water, but not enough to carry him through. Yeah, I'll come out there. Oh! Had faith to get out the boat, didn't have enough faith to carry him through. Though Jesus may seem to have left his hold, he does but seem to do so. For they shall never perish, neither shall any man pluck them out of his hand. And the last quote from Matthew Henry that I really liked was this. When faith is weak, and all of us in some sense have weak faith, our faith on a journey of growing. When faith is weak, prayer should be strong. Sometimes when you think of someone being a prayer warrior, someone like, man, they just have a great prayer life. You think, oh man, they must have great faith. Or maybe, in the weakness of our faith, that should drive us to more prayer. The prayer of, God, I believe. Help my unbelief. Help my doubts. Help me with my fears. If we want to have a strong faith, we get it through walking with God. We get it through prayer. We get it through spending time with our Maker. That's why, as believers, in the hardest of situations, we tend to pray more. Because our faith is struggling. May we have a strong prayer life that grows and increases our faith. When our faith is weak, our prayer should be strong. You see, trials, they reveal our fears and challenge our faith. Trials remind us of how fragile we are and how dependent upon God that we are for our very existence. Really quick. It's like, oh man, I'm not really in control of anything, am I? But God does not let us go in our fear. Rather, He does correct us, though. He's there for us, He helps us, and He corrects us. Because in Jesus, we do not have to live in fear. We can live by faith. The correction we have in Jesus is like, why are you doubting me? I'm here. I didn't go anywhere. I told you to come this way. Trust me. That's why it's important when God calls you to make a big life change or has you do this big adventurous thing and you're excited about it at first. It's important sometimes to write down all the God moments of like, man, God lined this up and God did this and then God orchestrated that and then God encouraged me with this and like, man, he gained my trust more here. But all of a sudden a trial comes along. Am I supposed to be doing this? And we forget everything that had happened up until that point because we're human and we're so easily swayed into our fears and we so easily lose faith sometimes. But we don't have to be afraid. Verse 51. And he went up unto them into the ship, and the wind ceased. So Peter and him walk back to the boat, they get on, and immediately the wind just stops. And they were sore amazed in themselves beyond measure and wondered. Now I had to pause for a minute, like, man, I get that they've never seen him walk on the water before. But why are they completely shocked by the whole thing? Like, look at what he's already done. Not only has he done all these miracles, he enabled them to do miracles too. They were literally going around healing people. And they were excited about it. And then a storm comes. Jesus walks on water. He gets on the boat like, whoa. This is completely shocked. I get it. They've never seen it before, but they're like, it's like they've never seen him do a miracle before. They'd even seen him calm a storm before. Two things I want to point out from the other Gospels. The Gospel of John tells us that when the wind stopped, immediately the ship was at the land whither they went. So some people have described this a couple different ways, because all it says is he gets on the boat, the wind stops, and they're where they're supposed to be. Some picture that as like just all of a sudden they're there, or some have pictured that as their rowboat turned to a speedboat. It got there very quickly. That's kind of a funny image. But not only did he stop the wind after walking into it, then he immediately brings them to where they were going. They couldn't get there. He had to bring them there. Do you see kind of a common theme happening in this text? You feed them. We can't do that. No problem. Multiplies food. Cross the sea. We're stuck. We can't get anywhere. No problem. I'll take you there. It's twice in the same narrative here. And here's what happens after that happens, all right? So storm ceases, boat where it's supposed to be, and then this is what happens in Matthew. This is what teaches us what happens next. Then they that were in the ship, the disciples, they came and worshiped him. This is the first moment, even for his closest companions. Well, they accepted him as their Messiah and believed that he was the promised Messiah. Something changed in this moment. They're like, of a truth, thou art the Son of God. They're not just calling him rabbi anymore. They're not just calling him master anymore. They're on their knees in the boat saying, you are the Son of God. Once again, I have to wonder, what was your first guess? Why did it take this specific miracle to get you to this point? Something I want to point out, and we'll get to that answer in a second, this worship that they give to Jesus. Pastor John MacArthur had this to say about this moment. He said this, in their worship, the disciples' astonishment transcended the mere fascination of the crowds. Many people were amazed by Jesus, but few truly worshiped him. The disciples had begun to understand the truth that his miracles had pointed to all along, that he was the Messiah, the Son of God. That recognition drove them to their knees as they willingly confessed the theological reality expressed through the New Testament, namely that Jesus Christ is Lord. So it went from like, yeah, we're following this guy, discipling him, he's the Messiah, like, oh, he's Lord, he's my God, I need to worship this man. Verse 52. They're sore amazed. They're wondered. All these things. Verse 51, verse 52. Why are they amazed by this? Why do they suddenly worship him because of this? Verse 52. For they considered not the miracle of the loaves, for their heart was hardened. Huh. What does that mean? Didn't consider? That wasn't a big deal when he multiplied the food? Or how about before that when he literally gave you power to go heal people? That was you didn't consider that? Nothing? They considered not the miracle of the loaves, for their heart was hardened. They had been resistant to understanding the significance of Jesus' miracles. They were resistant to understand that he was truly God in the flesh. And it's easy for us to look back at them and say, don't they see it? But we have the whole New Testament. We have so much of these things that they don't have at this moment, first of all. But even with all that we have, sometimes we're resistant to it. Sometimes our faith struggles. Sometimes like, man, but can God really do that? Is he everything he says he is? And sometimes a miracle happens in our life, like, oh yeah, he is. Like, he was before that happened. Because we have to be reminded sometimes. Get shook up sometimes within that. They've been resistant to it, but they're finally submitting to it. He is who he says he is. So you see, this storm, this trial ended with these disciples of Jesus on their knees, worshiping Jesus as the Son of God. And through the struggle that they faced, it miraculously helped them see Jesus so much more clearly. Sometimes going through a difficult situation, everything seems kind of fuzzy. It's like, how is this gonna? I don't see him. Where is he? But he's right there saying, hey, I'm here. And by the end of this, they saw him so much more clearly. And we must not simply acknowledge Jesus as a Savior. We must worship him in full submission because he is God. And God is good. He's so good, in fact, that what he calls us to, he brings us through. That's been the theme of this text. See, Jesus commanded his disciples to feed the 5,000. He miraculously multiplied the food and enabled the disciples to feed the crowd. Jesus commanded his disciples to cross the sea, and a windstorm came, causing them to be stuck. But Jesus calmed the storm and immediately brought them to the other side. Jesus called Peter out onto the water in the midst of the storm, and Jesus preserved his life. What Jesus calls us to, he brings us through. And that's what he did every time with his disciples. And that's what he does with us. But the key thing with that, see, it sounds really nice. It sounds like a great bumper sticker or something you can post on Facebook or Twitter. What do you call us to? Yeah. The problem is, it doesn't happen the way that we think. He calls us to things we don't expect him to call us to. And then how we get there? See, they thought they were going to get across by rowing. Didn't happen that way. They thought in order to feed that many people, they're going to have a fundraiser on GoFundMe, and it'd be a few weeks yet. But he called them to do stuff that seemed impossible or crazy. And like, how? And we can't see it sometimes. So I don't say that to be like an easy cliche statement. I say that to remind us of, you don't know what he's going to call you to or how he's going to call you through it, but whatever he calls you to, he's going to take you through it. Because that's what he does. Being challenged by that, be encouraged by that. And I don't even mean anything crazy. You could just be reading the Bible and be like, whoa, this is what Jesus wants me to do here? Just learning the basic principles of the Christian life and trying to practice Christian practices, spiritual practices in our life. Like, oh, that seems really difficult. Your word's telling me to do this. Love my enemy? How would you define enemy? Can we talk about this a little bit? Like, do you mean like that person who's a Cardinals fan, or? Oh no, you mean enemy. Oh, like real enemy. Oh. Love my neighbors? You mean like my family, right? Love people that can't do things back for me, like, oh. It's like, man, how am I going to do that? Well, it's about submitting to what God has. He's going to do that work in our hearts to make that authentic, to make that genuine in regards to the way that he wants us to love and forgive. And trust that God's going to enable you to do it. Because God calling you to have that kind of compassion and love for people, it's not natural. But he's called us as believers to it. And he's going to enable us to do it. He's going to bring us through that. Just submit to him. Just submit to what he has for us.